The following program is intended for mature audiences.
Rudy's Revelation.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
Google me, bitch! Google me!
Hey everyone, welcome to today's episode. It is Wednesday, March 26th. All right, so Mike Waltz says the signal leak is a conspiracy. We're going to get into all this news and more coming up. Don't forget to engage the channel, like, subscribe, share the podcast. Rudy's Revelation, finding revelation in the news and meaning in media. Let's get into the headlines. Got 30 headlines, over 30 headlines to get through, so let's read the news. All right, we're going to start out with the Associated Press. Breaking news, Trump overhauls U.S. elections in new executive order, including proof of citizenship. And we're going to get into more about this in just a second. The story goes on to say, President Donald Trump on Tuesday signed a sweeping executive action to overhaul U.S. elections, including requiring documentary proof of citizenship to register to vote in federal elections and demanding that all ballots be received by Election Day. The order calls on states to work with federal agencies to share voter lists and prosecute election crimes. It threatens to pull federal funding from states where election officials do not comply. Now, this is essential. And by essential, I mean essential. This should have been done a long, long time ago in his first term. They didn't see what was coming. The reality here is that all states in the federal government, all states in the United States need to comply with election laws, and the election laws need to be tightened to prevent the stealing of elections, election crime. Moving on to the Washington Times, the Republican National Congress, the RNC, asks states for details about their voter files, part of a larger effort to question elections. The article goes on to say the Republican National Committee, on Tuesday launched a massive effort to probe voter registration lists nationwide amid a broader strategy to seize on voter rolls to question the integrity of elections. The RNC sent public records requests asking for documents related to voter roll list maintenance to top election officials in 48 states and the District of Columbia, asserting that the public should know how the states are removing ineligible people from the voter rolls, including dead people and non-citizens. Move came the same day President Donald Trump took sweeping executive action seeking major changes to U.S. elections, including requiring documentary proof of citizenship, as we mentioned, to register to vote for federal elections. It also coincides with common misinformation narratives about non-citizens and dead people voting, cases of which are exceedingly rare and largely caught and prosecuted when it does occur. My problem here with the Washington Times is that it's not that rare. This is a constant misnomer when they say there's none, there's barely any. It's you don't want to erode voter confidence in the elections, and so the journalists insist on saying it doesn't happen. If it does happen, it's rare, and when it does occur, it's swiftly mitigated. None of this is true, especially since COVID and when we instituted the mail-out ballots. All right, trying to move a little quickly, less digression, less analysis, coming at you with a Federalist reports Trump signs executive order requiring proof of citizenship, paper ballots. Article goes on to say, despite a pioneering self-government, the United States now fails to enforce basic and necessary election protections employed by modern developed nations as well as those still developing. Free, fair, and honest elections, unmarred by fraud, errors, or suspicion, are fundamental to maintaining our constitutional republic. The right of American citizens to have their votes properly counted and tabulated without illegal dilution, and that's the important part, is vital to determining the rightful winner of an election. Now, here where I live in Connecticut, we had the case of Wanda, a Democrat Party official, who not just once but several times engaged in election fraud, voter fraud. The story goes on to say, ensuring only citizens can vote, it's already illegal for non-citizens to register to vote and vote in federal elections. But the only thing standing between them and safe and secure elections is a small square box on federal registration form that requires applicants to attest to their citizenship status under penalty of perjury. This is what I saw with several people that were obviously foreigners. I'm not sure if they were citizens or allowed to vote, but they went in to register to vote, and the registrar of voters there just simply said, "You're a citizen, right?" Right, check that box. Goes on to say, Trump's executive order states that within 30 days of proclamation, the Election Assistance Commission shall take appropriate action to require documentary proof of United States citizenship. Moving along here to the Washington Times, New Hampshire town officials offer a preview of citizenship voting rules being considered nationwide. It talks about two people in New Hampshire. Neither was able to participate in recent town elections in New Hampshire thanks to a new state law requiring proof of U.S. citizenship to register to vote. Their experiences, recounted by town clerks, could prove instructive for the rest of the country as the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act advances in Congress. And more than a dozen states under similar legislation on Tuesday. President Donald Trump signed a sweeping executive order that would require documentary proof of citizenship, as we have previously said, to register and vote in federal election, though it's likely to face swift challenges. Why do you think that is? Stay with me now. Fox News is reporting federal judge temporarily blocks shutdown of U.S.-funded radio network. D.C. federal judge grants Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty temporary restraining order in lawsuit against Kari Lake, who was shutting down the programs. Now, these programs are propaganda networks that are sponsored by the government, originally to face foreign adversaries, populations in Europe and around the world. In the event of conflict, they basically push pro-America, pro-democracy propaganda, but recently, since Obama, they've been allowed to broadcast here in the United States, which it was previously illegal to do. The article goes on to say a U.S. District Judge, Royce Lamberth, who was appointed by former President Ronald Reagan, granted a temporary restraining order on the shutdown of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, a nonprofit news organization. Sure it is. Originally founded in the 1950s by the Central Intelligence Agency to broadcast behind the Iron Curtain during the Cold War. Well, there's no more Iron Curtain in Europe, and there may be a Cold War, but it's not with the Soviet Union, which has been disbanded now for over 30 years. Congress later began funding in the 1970s to promote democracy across the globe. So originally it was a product of the CIA, but then Congress said, hey, let's spend money on it to promote to democracy. Really what it promotes is establishment thinking in terms of foreign policy, etc. So it's more of a broad-based propaganda network than what it was previously used to do, is to broadcast into Warsaw Pact states in Europe. NBC News is reporting Speaker Mike Johnson floats eliminating federal courts as GOP ramps up attacks on judges. Ooh, attacks again. The GOP is attacking. Republican lawmakers are setting their sights on judiciary following court rulings that have halted the Trump agenda. Exactly what they've done is halted the Trump agenda. Why? It's not good governance. It's just they don't want the Republicans to do what the Republicans are doing. Story goes on to say, we do have the authority over the federal courts. As you know, we can eliminate an entire district court. Says Johnson, we have the power of funding over the courts and all these other things, but desperate times call for desperate measures, Johnson went on to say. Johnson, who is a former constitutional attorney, later clarified that he was making a point about Congress having broad authority, more than, let's say, lesser court, over the creation, maintenance, and the governance of the courts. Indeed, Article 3 of the Constitution establishes the Supreme Court, but gave Congress the power to ordain and establish lower federal courts, period. So this next story is from the New York Post. We've heard about this. If you haven't heard about Jasmine Crockett, she recently said a bunch of things, including what seemed like trying to spur attacks on Elon Musk, which he should have been censured for that. But now she made this latest comment about the Texas governor who was paralyzed while jogging. So he's been in a wheelchair for some time and called him Hot Wheels. And now in the New York Post, Greg Abbott, the Texas governor, hits back at Jasmine Crockett after mocking his wheelchair use. Nothing to sell but hate. Abbott said the Democrats have nothing to sell but hate. The firebrand Texas rep was slammed after she branded Abbott Governor Hot Wheels on Saturday during a human rights campaign dinner in Los Angeles. And then from Fox News, social media erupts over Jasmine Crockett gaslighting about her calling Abbott Governor Hot Wheels. So she said she didn't mean it the way people thought she meant it, which she did mean it that way. Texas Governor Greg Abbott has been in a wheelchair for decades after he's been paralyzed. So I thought I had the other part of the article here. So Congress is considering a censure, which should have happened after she threatened Elon Musk. But after this latest fiasco, she has to be stopped. So she needs to be reprimanded through censure, congressional censure through the House, obviously. More news coming up. Reuters. Russia, Ukraine agree to see energy truce. Washington seeks easing of sanctions. Okay, so moving on with this story. Washington and Moscow from the 25th. Yesterday, the United States reached separate deals on Tuesday with Ukraine and Russia to pause their attacks at sea and against energy targets, with Washington agreeing to lift some sanctions against Moscow, while it's not clear when and how the Black Sea maritime security deals would start. The agreements are the first formal commitments by the two warring sides since President Donald Trump's inauguration. Trump is pushing to an end for the war in Ukraine, and a rapid rapprochement with Moscow has alarmed Kiev and European countries. Well, it's rapprochement. We need to have a better relationship with Russia, particularly since they're not communist anymore. There still should be an alliance against communism. U.S. agreement with Russia goes further than the agreement with Ukraine, with Washington committing to seek the lifting of international sanctions on Russian agriculture and fertilizer exports. So if you remember in the first term when General Michael Flynn was relieved from his national security advisor duties after the FBI meddled, what was happening was the administration during the transition was talking with Russia about, and Russia wanted us to ease sanctions, and so that's what the talk was about. So he thinks he has a friend in Donald Trump that will at least try to put forth some sort of detente. We'll see. One American News is reporting Trump requests immediate declassification of materials related to the FBI's Russia crossfire hurricane investigation. So if we didn't know what This was, Crossfire Hurricane was the Russia hoax FBI investigation into everything Trump. They illegally surveilled the Trump presidential campaign. They eavesdropped on Trump advisors and cohorts. It was all illegal. It was done. Actually, Boasberg, one of these federal judges, was actually on the heading the FISA court that allowed the FBI to put forth fraudulent applications for warrants, which should have never been granted for anybody connected to a U.S. presidential campaign. Reading from the story here, on Tuesday, President Donald Trump signed an executive order requiring the FBI to immediately declassify documents pertaining to the 2016 Crossfire Hurricane investigation, which sought to determine whether Trump campaign members colluded with Russia during the presidential campaign. That's not what it was at all. It was, they were just talking with Russia about whether or not there'd be a possibility to lessen sanctions and to improve the relationship. Trump noted that the media can now examine previously withheld information related to the probe after signing the order. But he questioned if many journalists would actually do so, as the findings would not satisfy left-wing journalists and reporters alike who have long believed the Russian collusion narrative to be true. It wasn't. I mean, Russia's looking out for their own self-interest. And then they quote Trump here by saying, "You probably won't bother because you're not going to like what you see," Trump explained, "but this was total weaponization. It's a disgrace. It should have never happened in this country, but now you'll be able to see for yourself. All the documents pertaining to this will be declassified, I guess, by the FBI. I wouldn't really trust them, though." Next article up here is from Law and Crime. Plaintiffs underscore the error of their position. Trump administration asks appeals court to block injunction over DOJ dismantling of U.S. aid. Quickly wins 3-day pause. So it's an injunction on the injunction. So it's a stay. It's not really an injunction. Is indeterminate amount of time. A stay has a limited amount of time. Article goes on to say, Trump administration on Tuesday asked for and quickly received permission to continue with controversial plans over the restructuring of the U.S. Agency for International Development. They don't really develop. They don't develop U.S. aid, but the relief was a quick spoliation date, which means it's only for 3 days. In a 16-page filing with the Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, the U.S. Department of Justice requested emergency relief in the form of an immediate administrative stay as well as a broader stay pending appeal of the underlying case that would overturn the preliminary injunction issued by Maryland District Court on May 18th. The crux of the matter is a dispute over the authority granted to DOJ head and Tesla CEO Elon Musk on what formal role, if any, he occupies with the current administration. Next headline up, the Washington Times, Trump freezes funding to Planned Parenthood. May seek criminal probe over fetus harvesting. And this is where they take the aborted fetuses and sell them for scientific research. The article goes on to say President Trump said on Tuesday he might pursue criminal charges against Planned Parenthood officials for their alleged role in trafficking the organs of aborted fetuses. This does indeed occur. His disclosure came the same day the Trump administration has taken steps to freeze tens of millions of dollars in federal family planning grants sent to the organization, a move aimed at defunding the group that provides health services to women, including abortions. I don't really like the way the Washington Times, I mean, they're trying to be journalists, but that's not really true. So basically, the tax dollars, doesn't matter how you feel about abortions, go to fund abortions for people that can't afford abortions. So it would be much easier just to give them the abortion pill, but whatever. And Planned Parenthood does not family plan. They don't plan for families. What they do is they're federally funded abortion clinics that have a two-pronged effect. One is limiting population growth. The others is to undermine populations of, let's just say, the inner city community. Usually what it does is the federal funding goes to abortions for people that can't afford it, so poor people. So what it does is it culls the population of the poor and indigent. Next headline up is from the post-millennial. Senators Mike Lee and Josh Hawley propose legislation to prevent judicial abuse. America's government cannot function if the legitimate orders of our commander-in-chief can be overridden at the whim of a single district court judge. Indeed. The article goes on to say they put forward the legislation, Mike Lee of Utah and Josh Hawley, I think is Missouri, that would curb the powers of the federal district court judges to enact judicial orders against the executive branch. Lee's bill, called the Restraining Judicial Activists Act of 2025, first reported on the Washington Examiner, seeks the check of powers of district court judges that have ruled against the decisions made by the executive branch. The act would create a 3-judge court to oversee rulings opposed to actions from the executive branch, such as an executive order, sort of like a FISA deal, I suppose, a panel. Lee said the bill, Americans' government cannot function if the legitimate orders of the commander-in-chief can be overridden at the whim of a single court judge. As we said, we have seen them presumed to run the military, the civil service, foreign aid, the HR departments across the executive branch, blatantly unconstitutional overreach indeed. And so it's great. I don't know if the Democrats will filibuster any of this stuff. The Federalist. Federalist is reporting Trump derangement syndrome will destroy the judicial branch. And the reason being, the judiciary has few weapons in a turf war with the executive. Goes on to say struggles between the executive and judicial branches date back almost to the founding of our country. In 1803 Supreme Court decision, Marbury versus Madison, the Supreme Court ruled that the then federal courts have a power of judicial review only. That's why they do stays and injunctions over the acts of the legislative and executive branches. The ruling rested largely on the proposition that it is emphatically the province and duty of the judicial department to say what law is. Not necessarily rule on that, but that is, courts have the power to state what the law is, which is merely to say the power to issue judgments and orders reflecting what the written word of the laws mean. But that is as far as the judicial power extends in the constitutional system. The judicial department has no constitutional power to actually control the president's management and execution of the laws. Indeed. That's why they're doing stays and stuff, because even though that's an action, they should just basically say whether or not the executive or Congress is breaking the law. They don't do that. They determine that there could be a violation of the law, and so whatever action is being taken has to be stopped. So it's obviously going to go to the Supreme Court, and more than likely it's going to fall on the side of the president. Hopefully, if Amy Coney Barrett doesn't gum up the works there. Stay with me. New York Post. Let's get into the Signal story. Atlantic editor Jeff Goldberg weighs obligation of releasing more war plans text as he reveals undercover CIA agent's identity was exposed. So he says, all right, so if you don't know who Jeff Goldberg is, he's an anti-Trumper. So we're going to get into the crux of the matter now, and this is from PJ Media. Mike Waltz wonders if it was a conspiracy. We're wondering about a few other things. Now, according to Fox News, actually, he said this on Fox News. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, Mike Waltz said, but of all the people out there, somehow this guy who has lied about the president gets on someone's contact and gets sucked into this group. Here's the theory that's bandering about, that he got in the Signal chat by pretending to be someone else. According to a preliminary investigation, he put in his Signal account under the name of someone within the administration. So his contact in the Signal chat was not Jeff Goldberg, editor-in-chief of the Atlantic magazine. Apparently, because, in any account, you could put whatever name and just put your handle there. So you could even change your name. You could do it on your email addresses. You could do it on texts. Usually texts, the receiver has to put it in what it is. But somehow his account handle was slipped in there. We don't know exactly how. Apparently, the Atlantic magazine had reached out to Mike Waltz a couple of weeks before, but we're not really sure. But let's get into the conspiracy. PJ Media goes on to say, you got to admit there's a heck of a coincidence, and I don't believe in coincidences, by the way. A coincidence is, in fact, a conspiracy. Out of all the people in D.C., one of the smuggest, most vicious Trump antagonists in the mainstream media is accidentally added to a secure chat. It doesn't quite pass the giggle test, says PJ Media. And the entire chain of events raises a series of questions. For example, in his article, Goldberg claims he voluntarily left the group chat on his own. But then there would be a pop-up. What kind of journalist with her salt would voluntarily leave that kind of chat room? It's assumed much more likely that the guy in Goldberg's shoes would continue to lurk in the shadows, trying to learn as much as he could and for as long as he could. Typically, journalists don't burn their sources. Indeed, they keep them because a good, reliable source is insanely valuable. Some media source relationships last for decades. Yet Goldberg discarded this one almost immediately. And it goes on to say, and isn't it weird that nobody noticed that he left the Signal group, as Goldberg wrote? Should have received an automatic, Waltz should have received an automatic notification. If you were in Waltz's shoes and you were notified that one of the most rabidly anti-Trump journalists in the industry has just left the White House group chat they had no business being in, at a freaking minimum, wouldn't you have followed up on it? Of course, it wasn't an error by Waltz, but some kind of cyber attack or actual timeline differs from Goldberg's reporting that could be explained how Goldberg was both privy to this info and left the group chat without notifying anybody else. Perhaps Goldberg is innocent in all of this. I doubt it. It could be a lot of things, as we know. For sure, this was really strange scandal with some puzzling inconsistencies. Yes, it could be a conspiracy or it could just be sloppiness at this point. Who the hell knows? Actually, the Democrats know this is bigger than Watergate. Just you wait. And the point they make, last thing, is that the Democrats are on the rope. Make no mistake, the donkeys are still dangerous. 2025 will either go down in history as a year we finally made America great again, or it could slip through our fingers, they say. I think it's conspiracy. How he got on the group chat, the fact that he lurked there, then him quickly exposing the so-called leak, hard to say. Right? How this all transpired now in the early days of the administration. It sounds very much like Waltz and some of the new people to the White House, just like with General Flynn, is that they were unaware of people trying to subvert or infiltrate. But that's exactly what happened. There was an infiltration. How it happened, they're putting it on Waltz. I think there's something more nefarious there. More headlines from Post-Millennial. PBS, NPR heads to testify on demonstrably biased news coverage before House DOJ subcommittee. And everybody knows that federal tax dollars should not be forced to pay for one-sided reporting, Representative from Georgia, Marjorie Taylor Greene said. The article goes on to say the subcommittee on delivering on government efficiency involved in the oversight of the federal government will hold a hearing where the leaders at NPR as well as PBS will be testifying in front of Congress on Wednesday. That's today. The hearing is titled Anti-American Airwaves, Holding the Heads of NPR and PBS Accountable, and the CEOs will be asked to explain why their demonstrably biased coverage, their news coverage, they produced for an increasingly narrow and elitist audience should continue to be funded by a broad tax-paying public. I agree. I don't think taxpayer dollars should go to things that are blatantly partisan. NPR for one, or PBS, or Planned Parenthood. And there have been conservative taxpayers that insist, why do we need to, and if that's the case, that they're going to continue to be funded, then an equal amount should go to other conservative media. Like, shouldn't Breitbart get some taxpayer dollars then? So, and then it goes on to say that Green said, I want to hear why NPR and PBS think they should ever again receive a single cent from the American taxpayer. These partisan so-called media stations dropped the ball on Hunter Biden's laptop, downplayed COVID-19 origins, and failed to properly report the Russian collusion hoax. Agreeable. What do we got up next here? Just the news. Governor DeSantis said he returned $500 million in funds to U.S. Treasury because of strings attached. And if you don't know what happens when you accept money from the federal government, the two-term Republican governor mentioned he recently met with Elon Musk and the U.S. Department of Government Efficiency about $330 million that was allocated for Florida projects. He also said the grant would have required the state to check tailpipe emissions, something that DeSantis said he would never do. Of course, they always throw in this kind of conditions. DeSantis said $170 million for various Florida-based non-governmental organizations, NGOs, was also part of the rejected funds, his first attempt to send the money back during the Biden administration. But it took a conversation with Musk to get the money returned to the U.S. Treasury, because Biden was all about spending money. He didn't want it back. He wanted it out there. Particularly because it was going to go to NGOs that I'm sure are affiliated with the Democratic Party. It's rare that states do that because they're usually like, gimme, 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 he says. Reality is that we have a role in trying to change the fiscal trajectory of this country. The governor of Florida said the reality is what we're doing is unsustainable, and he talked specifically about spending. Another headline here from the National Review: LGBTQ activist and trans husband house trans minor against mom's wishes. The girl identifies as a boy and has been diagnosed with autism. Oh, really? ADHD and an eating disorder, depression, and anxiety. Sure she does. She saw a school counselor without her mother's knowledge who advised the girl to terminate the parental notification and encourage her to participate in LGBT support groups, according to the girl's mother. When the girl ran away from home in December after a fight with her mother, she went home to the home of Joanne Smotherman, a former math teacher at a Colorado high school, and Joanne's husband, Vivian Smotherman, a trans-identifying man. On January 5th, Stein went with two friends to Smotherman's house and tried to retrieve her daughter. Stein called the police, and two deputies with the La Plata County Sheriff's Office responded and concluded a welfare check on her daughter. Basically, everybody's doing okay, right? So they didn't retrieve the daughter. The problem is they shouldn't have done a welfare check, I think, which was the wrong thing to do. They should have said, my daughter has been kidnapped, because that's the reality. Was she being held against her will? You know, the problem is a girl of 17 years old is still a minor. and is still under the charge of her parents. So can a parent say, I need you to come home right now? I mean, what happened? There's no like truancy or anything? I don't know. I guess if she's doing fine and she's there on her own accord, I still think that should be allowed. She's not being held against her will, but still. She should be returned to her parents' home. How can your child decide, I'm just going to go someplace and I'm not coming back? It's considered running away from home. They used to, prosecute that sort of thing. Post-millennial. Breaking news, arrest made after TPUSA chapter president violently assaulted by leftist wielding bike lock on Texas campus. Our chapter president, Paige Newman, and her secretary, Grace, were just assaulted by tabling at the University of Texas in Dallas. And that's a quote by Charlie Kirk, TPUSA CEO and founder Charlie Kirk. And then there's a reiteration here. An individual on bike approached them and launched an attack. The assailant shattered both of their phones and struck Newman in the head with a metal bike lock. Ouch. With the bike lock, hitting her so hard that it completely shattered Paige's phone. Wow. Another headline from Just the News. DHS Secretary Noem says gravy train is over at HUD for illegal immigrants. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development is teaming up with the Department of Homeland Security to prevent illegal immigrants from using public housing. HUD Secretary Scott Turner and U.S. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem signed the American Housing Programs for American Citizens Memorandum. It's a memorandum of understanding to end the use of taxpayer dollars to benefit non-citizens in the country illegally, who are in the country illegally, instead of helping American citizens. As part of the HUD agreement, HUD will provide a full-time staff member to assist in operations at the Incident Command Center, establishing an interagency partnership for data sharing to ensure taxpayer-funded housing programs are not used to harbor or benefit illegal aliens. Indeed. Goes on to say this is from Turner, American tax dollars should be used for the benefit of American citizens, especially when it comes to the issue of pressing our nation's housing crisis. So there's a housing crisis, there's a spending crisis. Both of these things should not be contributing to the influx or the housing or further benefit of illegal individuals in this country illegally. One American News reporting police, 2 Mexican nationals arrested after being accused of molesting minor in Cruzana, now on immigration holds. Oh my goodness. So this article goes on to say 2 Mexican nationals who are now in immigration holds were arrested after being accused of molesting a 14-year-old boy in a sauna while on board a Royal Caribbean cruise ship. The 14-year-old victim informed detectives that he was aboard the Royal Caribbean cruise ship in Independence of the Seas, and he was present in the sauna alongside Diaz and Leal. I guess these guys are Jose Prudencia Diaz and Ricardo Daniel Montagran Leal. And the victim explained to police that while he was in the sauna room with the 2 men, both suspects proceeded to pleasure themselves in front of him. The report goes on to detail how Diaz and Leal then began touching the victim while using certain fear tactics to force him to touch them back. Leal then purportedly forced the victim to perform a sexual act on him while molesting the minor. The arrest report also noted that Leal performed oral sex on the victim as well. Ugh. And then Kristi Noem goes on to say that the defendant in this case acted in concert with another defendant were both on the cruise. This shows that they tried to target a specific minor, and then this could be done again. And Noem said in a post on X that one of them has HIV and both have ICE detainers on them. We will get these sickos out of our country. All right. More news from Just the News. ICE agents in Houston arrest more than 600 criminal non-citizens, including many previously deported. The article goes on to say U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents in Houston continue to arrest and remove violent criminals illegally in the U.S. In several targeted operations, agents arrested more than 600 criminal foreign nationals, including scores who previously deported multiple times, confirmed gang members, sex offenders, and fugitives. ICE agents recently removed Orbelian Benitez Carbajal, a criminal Mexican national previously deported and convicted of manslaughter. He was returned to Mexico last week after previously being deported in 2014 and illegally re-entering the country last January. His criminal record includes manslaughter and assault in Travis County, driving while intoxicated in Austin, and illegal entry into West Texas in January 2024. All right, in separate news, this is from Reason Magazine. Sleepwalking into cashless society, central bank digital currencies would destroy any chance of financial privacy, but society is willing to move in that direction. Article goes on to say Philip Lane, a chief economist of the European Central Bank, recently expressed urgency for the need to develop a digital euro, also known as a central bank digital currency, CBDC, to compete against stable coins such as Tether and electronic payment systems developed by U.S. tech firms such as Google Pay and Apple Pay. And not content with eliminating cash, now the goal of central banks is to eliminate any competing electronic payment system. Well, what we have here is the promise of President Donald Trump never, ever, ever to allow the introduction of the U.S. Federal Reserve, the introduction then of a CBDC in America. Goes on to say far more sinister than the desire to socially engineer good behavior is the potential for central banks to implement stimulative monetary policy using negative interest rates. Cash pays no interest. Interest rates are off their pre-pandemic lows, so today it's not hard to find a bank that pays a decent interest rate on savings account, but in the 2010s, interest rates were zero for about a decade, and central planners believed that they could reverse deflation by setting interest rates at negative levels. This is bad. Negative interest rates mean that your money in the bank loses value over time instead of earning money. Naturally, people that would draw their money in the form of cash because zero interest is better than negative interest. But if cash didn't exist, people would be forced to spend the cash in the bank before it loses value. This is bad. Good for bankers, really bad for other folks. Boston.com, AI-assisted reporting in Boston area. Newsrooms raises questions about the role of new technology in building a community. Yeah, building a community. Several local news outlets have published articles by an AI-assisted reporter prompting experts to reflect on journalism's path forward. When I was still in the journalism business, they were using AI already. Basically writing, and I'll get into the story here, basically writing press releases, writing from press releases, digital press releases, and weather reports, and quick updates. Some publications in the Boston area have started using generative AI tool to assist in their reporting. Now, they would write the whole article, and it would be obviously proofed by an editor, but it's not help. These newsrooms are now implementing Espresso, an AI tool which helps reporters draft polished articles from community announcements. Again, the AI is helping. It's doing. It's not helping. You know, if you say, hey, I want to write a screenplay, and you get AI to write a screenplay, you didn't write the screenplay. Just because you prompted to doing it, you need a screenplay. The AI will write you the screenplay, and you could tweak it, I'm sure, and you could call it yours, but you're not doing the work. And then if you're getting paid for something like that, why would the person paying you not use AI to generate it themselves and pay nobody. More headlines from Reuters. Doge staffer Big Balls provided tech support for cybercrime ring, records show. And it goes into the article. I'm not going to go into it too much. The guy's real name is Korestein, Edward Korestein. But the article doesn't say that he did so unwittingly. He ran a company called Diamond CDN that provided network services and unwittingly provided network services to somebody that was laundering money, a cyber crime ring. You know, you could see the desperate nature, the desperation of the Democrats when they're trying to do all these things. They got the Goldberg thing going. They got the federal courts blocking Trump. And, you know, they're going after Elon Musk with their terrorists on the street, but also in the news media. And of course, you have Jasmine Crockett and other people slamming Elon Musk and calling him a thief, and he hasn't stolen anything. There's no proof that he stole anything. It's all hyperbole and really quite slanderous. New York Post is reporting evidence indicates former U.S. Attorney Jessica Aber, 43, died of natural causes in Virginia home. So if you didn't know what was happening here, she's a longtime Democrat district attorney in Southern Virginia, which is close to the CIA. And she was found dead in her home at the age of 43, and she died of natural causes. I think she was killed. Who knows why, what the motive was, but apparently she knew stuff. She knew things. Reuters is also reporting secretive Chinese network tries to lure fired federal workers. This is another false. This is a false story. They're secretive Chinese networks, communist networks, all over the United States doing all sorts of things. So it's not, it's the workers' fault, not the fault that they got fired. They got cut loose, laid off, so to speak. But if they decide to sell what they know for an adversary, that's espionage, and they should go to prison for life. So I don't blame the Chinese communists, and I don't blame Elon Musk for laying them off. But I would blame a federal worker if they decide to work for the enemy, because the whole point of working for the federal government is supposed to be some sort of patriotism. From Zero Hedge, another Chinese story. China purchases stall after Trump's tariff threat on buyers of Venezuelan oil. If you didn't know, China is the biggest buyer of Venezuelan oil and is estimated to be importing via various, often opaque channels at about 500,000 barrels a day. A large share of the cargo is being rebranded and coming in from Malaysia after transshipments in Asian waters. So they're hiding the amount they're purchasing from Venezuela. And now Trump is calling their bluff and saying, hey, we know you're buying through opaque means, but anybody who buys oil from Venezuela, China, or whatever, whoever's working for China is going to have to pay a hefty tariff. Now, some Chinese buyers are refraining from touching Venezuelan oil, and they're also worried about sanctions. Another article from Zero Hedge, why Americans are working less. Full-time employees in the U.S. have been working fewer hours per week for the past 5 years. Why did that happen? Obviously, that is because of COVID. For a lot of people, they realized, for a lot of older people, they realized that, hey, I'm working my ass off. I should be taking, because even I was worried what the future held. So people are thinking, I need to spend more time with my family. I need to do things I love to do rather than working all the time. And the younger people believe that I can't get ahead anyway, so why bust my ass? And to some degree, they're right. After a year, that's the equivalent of older employees taking off an extra week of work and younger employees taking an extra 2 weeks. These trends apply to both full-time employees working at least 30 hours a week, which isn't even really whole time. We did better today. So over 30 articles in less than an hour. What we're going to try to do. And less of my digression and analysis and blathering on. And more about the news. That you want to hear 30 headlines, at least 20 stories, separate stories that are happening around the world that's going to affect you and the political trajectory of the United States. And that's the most important thing. Thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a comment, share the podcast. Didn't get a Tuesdays with Perry up last night. I got hit with a emergency work order that I had to work on last night. So we might have an episode tonight. We're going to try. We were talking last night at length while I was working, but I couldn't do a show. I couldn't do a podcast. So thanks again for joining me. Remember, you're under attack psychologically and biologically. That's why we have this show. Join me live every day, Monday through Friday at 10 a.m., 10:30 about on Monday, to be honest. All right, stay hip to the trick. And I will see you hopefully tonight, if not tomorrow, for more news. Respect.